Sarah Mitchell was 8 years old when she first saw the silver warplane streak across the cloudy English sky. Standing in her family's small garden in Yorkshire, she shielded her eyes from the sun and watched the metal bird disappear behind the hills. Her heart raced with excitement she couldn't explain. "Come inside, Sarah," her mother called from the kitchen window. "Planes are dangerous things, not for little girls to be dreaming about." But Sarah couldn't stop dreaming. Every night she imagined herself soaring through clouds, her hands steady on the controls, the world spread out like a patchwork quilt below. Her father, a coal miner with blackened hands and tired eyes, would shake his head when he caught her drawing airplanes in her school notebooks. "Flying is man's work," he would say, not unkindly, but firmly. "Women belong on the ground, keeping things safe and steady." At school, Sarah's teacher, Mrs. Henderson, noticed her students' unusual interest. When other girls drew houses and flowers, Sarah sketched fighter planes with careful detail. She knew the difference between a Spitfire and a Hurricane before she knew how to properly set a dinner table. "Why do you draw those war machines?" Mrs. Henderson asked one afternoon, finding Sarah hunched over her desk during lunch break. "They're not just machines," Sarah replied, not looking up from her drawing. "They're freedom. They can go anywhere, do anything." Mrs. Henderson studied the young girl with growing concern. In 1938, such dreams were not just unusual for a girl, they were practically forbidden. Society had clear rules about what women could and couldn't do, and flying military aircraft wasn't even a distant possibility. Sarah's fascination grew stronger as tensions mounted across Europe. Radio broadcasts spoke of German planes gathering strength, of a possible war approaching. While adults discussed these developments in hushed, worried tones, Sarah felt something different stirring inside her, not fear, but determination. One evening, as her family listened to the BBC News, Sarah announced her intention. "When I grow up, I'm going to be a pilot." The room fell silent. Her older brother Thomas snorted with laughter. "Girls can't be pilots, Sarah, especially not in the military." "Why not?" she challenged, her young voice steady despite the trembling in her stomach. "Because," her father explained patiently, "flying requires strength, quick thinking under pressure, and nerves of steel. It's too dangerous for women." "How do you know I don't have those things?" Sarah asked. Her mother intervened gently. "Sweetheart, there are wonderful things for women to do. You could be a nurse, help wounded soldiers, or a teacher like Mrs. Henderson. Those are important jobs too." But Sarah had already made up her mind. That night, lying in her small bed under the slanted roof of their cottage, she made a silent promise to herself. She would prove everyone wrong. She would fly. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's voice crackled through their old radio, announcing that Britain was now at war with Germany. Sarah's parents looked at each other with fear in their eyes, thinking of their son Thomas, who was old enough to be called up for service. But Sarah felt something different. As terrible as war was, she sensed it might bring opportunities that peacetime never would. When everything familiar was turned upside down, perhaps the old rules about what women could and couldn't do might be challenged too. "This changes everything," she whispered to herself, watching her parents comfort each other in their worry. She was right, though none of them knew it yet. Within months, Britain would be desperately short of pilots. The country would need every capable person who could fly to defend the homeland, even women. But that autumn, Sarah was still just a determined 8-year-old girl with an impossible dream, living in a world that told her the sky wasn't her place. By 1940, the war had transformed everything Sarah Mitchell knew about the world. At 10 years old, she had grown taller and more determined, her dreams of flying now fueled by the daily reality of warplanes overhead and the urgent need for pilots that filled the newspapers. Her brother Thomas had joined the Royal Air Force and was training as a bomber pilot. When he came home on leave, Sarah peppered him with questions about flying, much to her family's dismay. "Tell me about the controls," she would beg. "How do you know which way to turn? What does it feel like when you climb?" Thomas, initially amused by his sister's persistence, began to take her seriously when he realized she remembered every detail he shared. She could recite the specifications of different aircraft and understood basic flight principles better than some of his fellow trainees. "She's got the mind for it," he admitted to their parents one evening. "I've never seen anyone pick up aviation theory so quickly." "Don't encourage her," their mother pleaded. It's hard enough worrying about you up there. But encouragement came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson had been following Sarah's progress with growing interest. She had heard about the Air Transport Auxiliary, a new organization that used civilian pilots to ferry aircraft from factories to airfields. Most remarkably, they were beginning to accept women pilots. "Sarah," Mrs. Henderson said after school one day, "I want to show you something." She handed Sarah a newspaper clipping about Pauline Gower, who was organizing the first group of women pilots for the ATA. The article included a photograph of 8 women standing proudly beside a small aircraft. Sarah stared at the image, her heart hammering. "They're really doing it? Women are flying?" "They are," Mrs. Henderson confirmed. "But they need proper training first. These women already knew how to fly before the war started." That moment changed everything for Sarah. She realized that dreaming wasn't enough. She needed to learn, to prepare, to make herself ready for the opportunity when it came. She began reading every aviation book she could find in the village library. She studied weather patterns, navigation, and aircraft mechanics. When her brother came home, she convinced him to teach her about radio procedures and military protocols. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Thomas asked one evening, finding Sarah hunched over a manual about engine maintenance. "More serious than I've ever been about anything," she replied. Thomas made a decision that would prove crucial to his sister's future. He arranged for Sarah to meet squadron leader James Morrison, his commanding officer, during his next leave. Morrison was initially skeptical about meeting a 10-year-old girl who claimed she wanted to be a military pilot. But within minutes of talking with Sarah, his attitude changed completely. "She understands aerodynamics better than cadets twice her age," he told Thomas privately. "And she's got something else, that instinctive grasp of three-dimensional movement that you can't teach." Morrison did something unprecedented. He arranged for Sarah to sit in the cockpit of a training aircraft at the local airfield. She was too young to actually fly, but he wanted to see how she handled herself in the environment. Sarah climbed into the cockpit with trembling hands, but once seated, a strange calm settled over her. The maze of instruments and controls didn't intimidate her. They felt familiar, like coming home. "Talk me through your pre-flight check," Morrison instructed. Sarah's hands moved confidently across the instrument panel, calling out each step in the proper sequence. She had memorized the procedures from her brother's training manuals. "Extraordinary," Morrison murmured to Thomas. "She's a natural." When Sarah climbed down from the cockpit, Morrison knelt to her eye level. "Young lady, you have real potential, but you'll need more than dreams to make this work. You'll need to be better than good. You'll need to be exceptional." "I will be," Sarah said with quiet confidence. Morrison arranged for Sarah to continue visiting the airfield, where she could observe training flights and learn from experienced pilots. It was highly irregular, but the war was creating new possibilities every day. Sarah's parents remained opposed, but they could see their daughter's determination was unshakable. Her mother finally said, "If you're going to do this impossible thing, then do it properly. Don't give anyone reason to say you're not qualified." Sarah threw herself into preparation with single-minded focus. She studied mathematics, physics, and geography with new intensity. She learned to read maps and understand weather reports. She even convinced the local mechanic to teach her about engines. By her 11th birthday, Sarah Mitchell had transformed from a dreamy child into a focused young woman with a clear mission. She knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life, even if the rest of the world wasn't ready to accept it yet. But war has a way of changing what society is ready to accept. Sarah Mitchell's first real flight came on her 15th birthday, though it wasn't supposed to happen at all. By 1943, she had spent nearly 3 years learning everything she could about aviation while continuing her regular schooling. The war had intensified and the need for pilots had become desperate. Squadron leader Morrison had watched Sarah's progress with amazement. She could identify aircraft by sound alone, navigate using only a compass and map, and explain complex flight maneuvers with the precision of a seasoned instructor. But until that spring morning, she had never actually taken control of an aircraft. "The weather's perfect for flying," Morrison commented as Sarah arrived at the airfield for her usual observation session. "Shame we can't get you up there legally." Sarah looked longingly at the small training aircraft parked on the grass. She knew every switch, every gauge, every control surface of that plane. In her dreams, she had flown it 1,000 times. "Sir," she said carefully, What if someone needed to move that plane to the hangar, and the regular pilot wasn't available? Morrison studied her with a knowing look. That would be a problem, wouldn't it? Especially since I'd be the only qualified instructor here to supervise such a relocation. What happened next would later be described in Morrison's official log as emergency aircraft positioning due to weather concerns, though the sky remained perfectly clear all day. Sarah's hands shook as she performed the pre-flight inspection she had memorized years earlier. Morrison watched silently, making no corrections as she checked fuel levels, tested control surfaces, and examined the propeller for damage. Remember, Morrison said quietly as they climbed into the cockpit, this is just moving the aircraft to the hangar. Nothing more. But as Sarah's hands found the controls, something magical happened. The airplane seemed to respond to her touch like it had been waiting for her all along. The engine's rhythm felt familiar, the vibration through the control stick natural and right. Take us up, Morrison instructed, his voice calm despite the irregularity of the situation. Sarah pushed the throttle forward, and the small plane began rolling across the grass. She had watched this moment hundreds of times, but feeling the aircraft respond to her inputs was beyond anything she had imagined. The plane lifted off so smoothly that Morrison barely felt the transition. Sarah's touch on the controls was light but confident, her scan of the instruments automatic and thorough. How does it feel? Morrison asked as they climbed to 500 feet. Like I've been waiting my whole life for this moment, Sarah replied, her voice filled with wonder but her hands steady on the controls. For 20 minutes, Sarah flew the training aircraft around the local area. She performed gentle turns, climbed and descended smoothly, and even attempted a few basic maneuvers. Morrison offered guidance, but minimal correction was needed. You're a natural pilot, he told her as they approached for landing. I've never seen anyone take to flying so instinctively. Sarah's landing wasn't perfect. She bounced slightly on touchdown, but it was safe and controlled. As she taxied the aircraft back to its parking spot, she felt tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. This is what I'm meant to do, she whispered. Morrison made a decision that day that would change Sarah's life forever. He began documenting her training in his official records, carefully wording his entries to make her progress appear legitimate. On paper, she became an aircraft maintenance observer, who occasionally assisted with ground handling procedures. Word of Sarah's abilities began to spread quietly through the aviation community. Other instructors came to watch her fly, initially skeptical but quickly impressed. Captain Helen Morrison, one of the few women pilots in the Air Transport Auxiliary, made a special visit to evaluate Sarah's potential. She's remarkable, Captain Morrison told Squadron Leader Morrison after flying with Sarah. I've never seen such natural ability in someone so young. But you know the challenges she'll face. The challenges were real and formidable. Official military pilot training didn't accept women under 18, and even then, only for transport duties. Combat roles remained strictly forbidden for women, regardless of their abilities. But Sarah had supporters now, people who believed in her potential and were willing to help her navigate the system. They began planning for her future, identifying the best path forward despite the obstacles. Sarah continued her unofficial training through the summer of 1943, accumulating flight time while maintaining the fiction that she was simply helping with aircraft maintenance. Her skills improved rapidly, and her confidence grew with each flight. By autumn, she could handle emergency procedures, navigate long cross-country flights, and fly in challenging weather conditions. She had become, in all but official recognition, a qualified pilot. You're ready for the next step, Morrison told her one evening as they secured the aircraft after another training session. But that step is going to require courage beyond anything you've shown so far. What kind of courage? Sarah asked. The courage to demand what you've earned even when the world tells you it's impossible. Sarah looked up at the darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Somewhere up there, her brother Thomas was flying bombing missions over Germany, risking his life for his country. She knew she had the same skills, the same dedication, and the same courage. I'm ready, she said simply. Morrison nodded. Then let's make history. Sarah Mitchell stood outside the imposing doors of the Royal Air Force headquarters in London, her palms sweating despite the cool morning air. At 16, she looked older than her years, her posture straight and confident, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She carried a leather portfolio containing flight logs, training records, and letters of recommendation from every pilot who had worked with her. "Miss Mitchell," the secretary announced, "Air Vice Marshal Thompson will see you now." Sarah had spent months preparing for this moment. Squadron Leader Morrison had used his connections to arrange this meeting, though he had warned her that Thompson was notoriously traditional in his views about women in combat. Rolls Thompson was a large man with steel-gray hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. He gestured for Sarah to sit across from his massive oak desk, which was covered with maps and operational reports. "Miss Mitchell," he began, his voice formal and skeptical, "I understand you believe you're qualified for combat pilot training. That's a rather extraordinary claim for someone your age, particularly a young woman." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. "I believe my flight records speak for themselves." Thompson opened her portfolio and studied the documents with growing interest. Page after page documented hundreds of hours of flight time, proficiency in multiple aircraft types, and glowing evaluations from experienced pilots. "These records are impressive," he admitted grudgingly. "But flying training aircraft in peacetime conditions is quite different from combat operations. War flying requires nerves of steel, split-second decision-making, and the ability to function under extreme pressure." "With respect, sir," Sarah said, "I've been flying in wartime conditions. I've navigated through blackouts, landed in crosswinds that grounded other pilots, and handled multiple aircraft emergencies. My instructors have put me through scenarios that many combat pilots never face in training." Thompson leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "Why do you want this, Miss Mitchell? Really want it? There are other ways to serve your country that don't involve risking your life in aerial combat." Sarah had anticipated this question and had her answer ready. "Sir, my brother Thomas was shot down over France last month. His squadron is severely undermanned like most RAF units. Every qualified pilot who isn't flying is a resource we can't afford to waste. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for the chance to prove I can do the job as well as any man." The mention of her brother's loss seemed to affect Thompson. His expression softened slightly as he continued reading her file. "Your instructors speak very highly of your abilities," he said. "Squadron Leader Morrison calls you the most naturally gifted pilot I've encountered in 20 years of service. Captain Helen Morrison describes your instrument flying as exceptional and your combat maneuvering as instinctive." Sarah remained silent, letting the evaluations speak for themselves. Thompson closed the portfolio and stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the Thames. "Miss Mitchell, what you're asking for is unprecedented. No woman has ever been accepted for combat pilot training in the Royal Air Force. The political ramifications alone—" "Sir," Sarah interrupted respectfully, "with respect, these are unprecedented times. We're fighting for our nation's survival. Shouldn't we use every weapon in our arsenal?" Thompson turned back to face her. "Even if I were inclined to approve your request, and I'm not saying I am, you'd face enormous challenges. Many of the men wouldn't accept you. Some would actively try to force you out. The physical demands are extreme, the danger constant. One mistake could cost not only your life but the lives of your squadron mates. I understand the risks, sir, but I also understand that good pilots are dying, while qualified people remain grounded because of arbitrary restrictions." Thompson returned to his desk and picked up a photograph from the corner. A young man in RAF uniform who bore a resemblance to Thompson himself. "My son David was a pilot," he said quietly. "Shot down over the Channel 6 months ago. 22 years old, full of dreams about the future." He looked up at Sarah. "Do you have any idea what it's like to send young people into combat, knowing that some one of them won't come home?" "No, sir, I don't. But I know what it's like to have the ability to help and be prevented from using it. My brother died because his squadron was understaffed. How many other pilots might be alive today if we'd been willing to consider all our options?" Thompson was quiet for a long moment, staring at his son's photograph. Finally, he looked back at Sarah with something approaching respect. "I'm going to do something that will probably end my career," he said. "I'm going to recommend you for advanced evaluation at the Royal Air Force College Cranwell. It's not approval for combat training. It's a chance to prove you belong there." Sarah's heart leaped, but she kept her expression composed. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Thompson warned. "The evaluation process is designed to eliminate candidates. You'll be tested physically, mentally, and emotionally beyond anything you've experienced. You'll be the only woman among 200 men, most of whom will believe you have no business being there. I understand, sir. Thompson stood and extended his hand. One more thing, Miss Mitchell. If you do this, you'll be representing more than yourself. Every woman who comes after you will be judged by how you perform. That's an enormous responsibility. Sarah shook his hand firmly. I won't let them down, sir. Or you. As Sarah walked out of the headquarters building, she felt the weight of history on her shoulders. She was about to attempt something no woman had ever done before, in a world that believed it was impossible. But impossible had never stopped her before. She looked up at the sky, where RAF fighters were already beginning their morning patrols, and smiled. Soon she might be up there with them, finally where she belonged. The Royal Air Force College at Cranwell had never seen anything like Sarah Mitchell. When she arrived on a gray October morning in 1944, carrying a single suitcase and her father's old leather flight jacket, conversation stopped and heads turned throughout the base. That's her, she heard whispers follow her across the courtyard. The girl who thinks she can be a fighter pilot. Sarah kept her eyes forward and her chin up, though inside she felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes examining her every move. She had been assigned a private room in the administrative building rather than the barracks, which she knew immediately marked her as different, as an outsider. Flight Lieutenant James Crawford, the chief training instructor, gathered the new candidates in the main briefing room for orientation. He was a stern man with graying temples and eyes that missed nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, then paused and looked directly at Sarah. Or should I say, lady and gentlemen, welcome to the most challenging military aviation program in the world. Over the next 12 weeks, we will test every aspect of your fitness to serve as Royal Air Force pilots. He outlined a program that would have intimidated seasoned veterans. Physical training at dawn, classroom instruction on everything from meteorology to aircraft recognition, followed by intensive flight training in increasingly complex aircraft. The washout rate was typically 60%. Some of you are here because of political pressure rather than merit. Crawford continued, his gaze again finding Sarah. Politics won't help you when you're facing a German fighter at 20,000 feet. Only skill, courage, and absolute dedication will keep you alive. The other candidates, all men between 18 and 25, regarded Sarah with mixtures of curiosity, skepticism, and barely concealed hostility. During their first meal together, she sat alone at one end of a long table while conversations buzzed around her. How much do you think she paid to get in here? One cadet whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. Probably some government scheme to make them look progressive, another replied. She'll be gone within a week. Sarah ate her meal in silence, but inwardly she made a promise. She would not just survive this program, she would excel in it. The physical training began at 5 a.m. the next morning. Sarah had prepared for this, spending months building her strength and endurance, but she quickly discovered that preparation and reality were different things. The instructors pushed them through grueling exercises designed to test their limits. By the end of the first week, 12 candidates had already washed out. Sarah, despite being smaller than most of her classmates, kept pace with the best of them. Her years of determination had built not just physical strength, but mental toughness that impressed even her critics. The real test came in the air. Sarah's first flight at Cranwell was in a Harvard trainer, more powerful and complex than anything she had flown before. Her instructor, Flight Lieutenant Peters, had made no secret of his belief that women had no place in military aviation. All right, Mitchell, Peters said as they strapped into the cockpit. Let's see what all the fuss is about. Sarah ran through her pre-flight checks with practiced precision, then taxied the Harvard to the runway. As she advanced the throttle for takeoff, she felt the familiar surge of joy that came with every flight despite the hostile environment. Her first hour in the Harvard went flawlessly. She demonstrated steep turns, stalls, and recovery procedures with the skill of a much more experienced pilot. Peters, despite his prejudices, couldn't find fault with her performance. Not bad for a first attempt, he grudgingly admitted as they taxied back to the hangar. Word of Sarah's flying ability spread quickly through the base. Her classroom performance was equally impressive. She had the highest scores in navigation, aircraft recognition, and tactical theory. By the end of the third week, even her harshest critics had to acknowledge her competence. But competence wasn't enough. Combat flying required something beyond technical skill. It demanded the ability to make life-and-death decisions in seconds, to function under the extreme stress of aerial combat. The turning point came during a formation flying exercise. Sarah was flying as wingman to Cadet Officer Reynolds, an arrogant young man from a prominent military family who resented her presence at Cranwell. "Stay in position, Mitchell," Reynolds commanded over the radio as they flew in tight formation with 4 other aircraft. "Try not to embarrass yourself." They were practicing combat maneuvers when Reynolds made a critical error. Banking too steeply while climbing, he put his aircraft into an inverted spin. One of the most dangerous situations a pilot can face. "I can't recover." Reynolds' panicked voice came over the radio. "I'm going to have to bail out." Sarah could see Reynolds fighting with his controls, his aircraft spinning wildly toward the ground. She had seconds to act before he would have to abandon his plane and possibly die in the process. Without hesitation, Sarah broke formation and dove after Reynolds' spinning aircraft. Using a recovery technique she had studied but never attempted, she positioned her plane precisely beneath his and talked him through the recovery over the radio. "Reynolds, listen to me," she commanded, her voice calm despite the desperate situation. "Push your stick full forward, then neutralize the rudders. Don't fight the spin, work with it." Following her instructions, Reynolds managed to recover from the spin with less than 1,000 feet to spare. Both aircraft leveled out safely and returned to base, where they were met by emergency vehicles that had been scrambled when the spin was reported. Flight Lieutenant Crawford was waiting when they landed. "Mitchell," he said, "that was exceptional flying. You may have saved Reynolds' life." Reynolds, shaken by his near-death experience, approached Sarah after they had parked their aircraft. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I owe you my life." From that day forward, Sarah's position at Cranwell changed fundamentally. She was no longer seen as an unwelcome intruder, but as a skilled pilot who had proven herself under pressure. Her classmates began including her in conversations, asking for her help with difficult maneuvers and treating her as one of the team. But Sarah knew the real test was still ahead. Combat training was about to begin, and that would determine whether she truly belonged in the sky with the Royal Air Force's finest pilots. Sarah Mitchell graduated from the Royal Air Force College at Cranwell with the highest scores in her class, but she knew the real challenges were just beginning. At 17, she had become the youngest and first female pilot ever commissioned as a flight lieutenant in the RAF. But earning her wings was only the first step toward her ultimate goal. The war had entered its final phase, and the need for experienced pilots was more desperate than ever. Sarah was assigned to RAF Northolt, where she would complete advanced fighter training before being assigned to an operational squadron. The pressure was enormous. Every eye in the RAF was watching to see if the experiment of women combat pilots would succeed or fail. Wing Commander Patricia Thornton, one of only 3 women to hold such a high rank in the RAF, called Sarah into her office on her first day at Northolt. Thornton was a legend in aviation circles, having commanded transport operations throughout the war, but even she had never attempted what Sarah was trying to do. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Thornton said, gesturing for Sarah to sit, "you've accomplished something remarkable, but I need to be frank with you about what lies ahead. You're about to enter a world where a single mistake could cost not only your life, but the lives of every pilot under your command." "I understand the responsibility, ma'am," Sarah replied. "Do you? Because you're not just learning to fly fighters, you're being fast-tracked for squadron command. The brass has decided that if they're going to have a woman in combat, she needs to be exceptional enough to silence all critics." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Squadron command meant leading dozens of pilots into the most dangerous missions of the war. It was an honor that typically took years to achieve. "Your training will be accelerated and intensified beyond anything attempted before," Thornton continued. "You'll master 4 different fighter aircraft, learn advanced combat tactics, and study squadron leadership, all in 8 weeks. Most pilots take 2 years to reach that level. The training began immediately. Sarah's day started before dawn and ended well after midnight. She flew Spitfires, Hurricanes, Tempests, and the new Meteor jet fighters, learning the unique characteristics of each aircraft until she could fly them blindfolded. Her gunnery instructor, Flight Lieutenant Davies, was initially skeptical about training a woman for air-to-air combat. "Shooting down enemy aircraft isn't like target practice," he warned during her first session. "You'll have seconds to make the kill before they kill you." But Sarah's marksmanship was exceptional. Her scores on the combat range consistently exceeded those of veteran pilots. More importantly, She demonstrated the split-second decision-making that separated good pilots from great ones. "She's got the killer instinct," Davies grudgingly admitted to Thornton. "I've never seen anyone pick up aerial gunnery so quickly." The tactical training was equally intense. Sarah studied German fighter tactics, learned to coordinate multi-squadron operations, and mastered the art of leading formations through complex combat maneuvers. Her instructors threw every possible scenario at her: numerical disadvantage, mechanical failures, weather emergencies, wounded pilots. Sarah absorbed it all with remarkable composure. Her fellow trainees, initially resentful of the special attention she received, began to respect her dedication and skill. By the 6th week, they were asking her for advice on difficult maneuvers. "She's not just keeping up," reported Squadron Leader Hamilton, her formation flying instructor. "She's setting the pace for everyone else." The final test came during a simulated combat exercise against experienced RAF pilots flying captured German aircraft. Sarah was given command of a flight of 4 Spitfires and told to intercept a formation of enemy fighters attempting to reach London. The exercise began at 25,000 feet over the English Channel. Sarah's flight was outnumbered 6-4, and the opposing pilots were among the RAF's most experienced combat veterans. On paper, her chances of success were minimal. "Red leader to red flight." Sarah's voice came calmly over the radio as she spotted the enemy formation. "Bandits at 2 o'clock high. We'll use the sun for cover and attack from above." Her tactical sense was flawless. Using the sun to mask their approach, Sarah led her flight into a perfect attack position. When she gave the order to engage, her pilots executed the maneuver with precision that impressed even the exercise controllers. Within minutes, Sarah's flight had shot down 4 of the 6 enemy aircraft while losing none of their own. The exercise was terminated early due to the decisive nature of their victory. "Exceptional leadership," commented Air Commodore Richardson, who had observed the exercise. She commanded that flight like a veteran with years of combat experience. That evening, Sarah received the news she had been hoping for since childhood. She was being promoted to squadron leader and given command of the 403rd Fighter Squadron, 100 of the RAF's finest pilots flying the most advanced aircraft in the world. Squadron Leader Mitchell, Wing Commander. Thornton said during the promotion ceremony, "You're about to make history. No woman has ever commanded a combat squadron, and the 403rd will be facing the most dangerous missions of the war." Sarah stood at attention, her new squadron leader's insignia gleaming on her uniform. "I'm ready, ma'am." "I believe you are," Thornton replied. "But are you ready for what comes next?" Intelligence reports suggest the Germans are planning one final, desperate air offensive. If they're right, you'll be leading your squadron into the fiercest battle ever fought in the skies. Sarah thought of her brother Thomas, shot down over France, and all the other pilots who had sacrificed everything for their country. She thought of the 8-year-old girl who had watched that first warplane cross the Yorkshire sky and dared to dream the impossible. "Let them come," she said quietly. "My squadron will be ready." Within hours, Sarah Mitchell would face her greatest test, not just as a pilot, but as a leader responsible for the lives of 100 aircrew and the defense of her homeland. The morning of March 15, 1945, dawned cold and clear over RAF Biggin Hill, where Squadron Leader Sarah Mitchell stood before the largest formation of aircraft she had ever commanded. 100 Spitfires and Tempests were lined up on the airfield, their engines warming in the crisp morning air, while their pilots gathered around Sarah for the final briefing. At 18 years old, she was younger than most of the men she commanded, but every face looking back at her showed complete trust and confidence. Over the past 3 months, she had earned their respect through her skill, courage, and unwavering dedication to bringing them all home safely. "Gentlemen," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled pilots, "intelligence reports indicate that the Luftwaffe is launching Operation Thunderstorm, their final desperate attempt to break our air superiority. We're facing over 300 enemy aircraft, including their newest jet fighters and experienced pilots pulled from every remaining squadron in Germany." The pilots listened intently as Sarah outlined the enemy's likely tactics. The Germans would come in waves, trying to overwhelm British defenses through sheer numbers. Their target was London itself. If they could break through and bomb the capital, they hoped to force Britain to negotiate a separate peace. "Our job is simple. Sarah continued, pointing to the tactical map behind her. We stopped them. All of them. No enemy aircraft reaches London. No exceptions. Flight Lieutenant Peters, Sarah's former instructor who now served as her second-in-command, stepped forward. Squadron leader, what about the reports of German jets? Our Spitfires can't match their speed. Sarah had anticipated this question. The jets are fast, but they're also new and unreliable. Their pilots are inexperienced with the aircraft, and they have limited fuel. We use our maneuverability and experience against their speed, hit them when they're vulnerable, during takeoff, landing, or when they're low on fuel. The briefing continued for another 20 minutes as Sarah assigned specific formations their roles in the coming battle. Some would engage the German fighter escorts, others would focus on the bombers, and her personal flight would hunt the dangerous new jet fighters. As the pilots dispersed to their aircraft, Flight Lieutenant Reynolds, the same man whose life Sarah had saved during training, approached her with a concerned expression. Sarah, he said quietly, using her first name as he did only in private moments, the odds are brutal, 3-1 against us, and that's if our intelligence is accurate. It could be worse. Sarah looked up at the sky where the first reconnaissance flights were already airborne. Michael, do you remember what you told me when I first arrived at Cranwell? That I'd never make it through training? Reynolds smiled grimly. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. The Germans are making the same mistake, Sarah said. They think we can't stop them because we're outnumbered. They don't understand that we're fighting for our homes, our families, our future. That makes us stronger than any numbers advantage they might have. At 0800 hours, the first enemy formations appeared on radar, approaching from the southeast at high altitude. Sarah's voice crackled over the radio to all stations. Scramble all aircraft. This is it, gentlemen. Show them what the Royal Air Force can do. The roar of 100 aircraft taking off simultaneously shook the ground at Biggin Hill. Sarah led her personal flight of 12 Spitfires into the brightening sky, climbing rapidly toward the incoming German formations. At 20,000 feet, she got her first visual contact with the enemy. The sight was breathtaking and terrifying. A massive formation of German bombers protected by swarms of fighters, stretching across the horizon like a deadly cloud. Tally-ho, Sarah called over the radio. Enemy aircraft 12 o'clock high, numerous bandits. The battle that followed would later be called the fiercest air combat of the entire war. For 3 hours, the sky over southern England was filled with the thunder of engines, the chatter of machine guns, and the smoke trails of burning aircraft. Sarah led her pilots through the chaos with calm precision, directing attacks, coordinating with ground control, and personally accounting for 7 enemy aircraft. Her tactical decisions were flawless, her flying inspirational, and her leadership absolute. When the first German jet fighters appeared, Sarah immediately adjusted her tactics. Red Flight, follow me, she ordered. We're going after the jets. Stay high and use diving attacks. Don't try to turn fight them. The new German jets were indeed fast, but their pilots were inexperienced and their fuel consumption enormous. Sarah's patient tactics paid off when she caught a formation of jets returning to base with empty fuel tanks, their speed advantage neutralized by their vulnerability. By noon, the German offensive had been shattered. Of the 300 aircraft that had crossed the channel that morning, fewer than 50 made it back to their bases. The RAF had lost 27 aircraft, but every pilot had either been rescued or returned safely. As Sarah landed her Spitfire back at Biggin Hill, she was met by Wing Commander Thornton and Air Vice Marshal Thompson, who had traveled from London to witness the battle. Squadron Leader Mitchell, Thompson said as Sarah climbed down from her cockpit, "You've just commanded the most successful defensive action in RAF history. Your tactical leadership saved London and quite possibly changed the course of the war." Sarah looked around at her pilots, who were celebrating their victory, while mechanics worked to repair and refuel their aircraft. Several pilots bore minor wounds, but all had survived the day that many had expected to be their last. "Sir," Sarah replied, "we did what the Royal Air Force has always done. We defended our island home. The only difference is that this time, everyone finally got to see that women can fight just as courageously as men." News of the battle spread quickly throughout Britain and around the world. The young woman who had been told the sky wasn't a place for women had led 100 warplanes in the fiercest battle ever flown, and emerged victorious. Sarah Mitchell had not only proven that women belonged in the cockpit, She had shown that they could lead from the front in the most dangerous conditions imaginable. The 8-year-old girl who had watched that first warplane cross the Yorkshire sky had kept her promise to herself. She had risen higher than anyone thought possible, and in doing so, had opened the sky for every woman who would follow.